Sheriff Raymond Caulfield stood in the middle of Loretta Vance's empty kitchen on January 15, 1945, and counted the coffee cups drying beside the sink. 4. The FBI agents behind him were shouting orders into field radios, organizing search teams across 3 counties, but Caulfield kept staring at those cups, each one turned upside down on a clean towel. The German POW labor camp sat 3 miles outside Cedar Ridge, Kansas, on what used to be the Hoffmeer grain farm before the War Department took it over in the spring of 1943. The official name in federal records listed it as Auxiliary Camp Cedar Ridge, housing capacity 47, classification low security, agricultural detail. By December of 1944, the camp held 32 German officers captured in North Africa and Sicily, men whose surrender had marked them as not suitable for harder labor details in the larger prison facilities. They worked on surrounding farms under minimal supervision, a single army sergeant and 2 local deputies rotating watch duties. The camp's security rules reflected a calculation that appeared sound at the time. Rural Kansas in winter offered no realistic escape route. The nearest major city lay 200 miles south. The Mexican border sat 800 miles beyond that. Temperature readings from December 1944 show sustained lows between 5 and 15 degrees Fahrenheit, with several nights dropping below zero. The landscape provided no natural shelter beyond scattered farmhouses miles apart. Attempting to cross that terrain without supplies, transportation, or detailed maps would be a death sentence that most rational men would refuse. Camp records preserved in the National Archives show that Hauptmann Klaus Becker arrived at Cedar Ridge in August of 1944, transferred from a larger facility in Nebraska after a physical fight with another prisoner left him hospitalized for 6 days. His service file indicated combat experience in North Africa under Rommel, fluency in English acquired during pre-war study at Oxford, and a notation reading intelligent but unpredictable temperament. Lieutenant Otto Reinhardt came 2 weeks later, a former school teacher from Bavaria whose surrender at Palermo had included a formally written letter explaining his refusal to continue fighting. Gefreiter Werner Hoffmann rounded out the trio in September, a career soldier whose records showed nothing remarkable beyond mechanical ability and a complete absence of disciplinary incidents. The camp maintained a work detail rotation that sent prisoners to surrounding farms based on seasonal labor requirements. Loretta Vance first appeared in these rosters on November 2, 1944, requesting assistance with grain loading. Her farm sat 7 miles northwest of Cedar Ridge proper, isolated even by local standards, connected to the main county road by 2 miles of dirt track that became impassable during heavy weather. The camp administrator, Sergeant Eugene Farley, approved the request without special consideration. The notation in his logbook reads simply, Widow Vance, grain detail 3 men, standard supervision. What those records failed to capture was the woman who drove that grain truck through the camp gates that November morning, or the peculiar intensity with which she watched the 3 Germans loading 40-pound sacks into her truck bed under a sky promising early snow. Loretta Vance had been married to Private First Class Daniel Vance for 11 months before the telegram arrived on June 9, 1944. The Western Union message preserved in county casualty records contained 23 words informing her that her husband had been killed during the initial assault on Omaha Beach. She was 22 years old. Neighbors who attended the memorial service at Cedar Ridge Methodist Church described a young woman who sat motionless through the entire ceremony, her face expressionless, her hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for a bus. The Vance farm had never been prosperous. Daniel's father had lost it to the bank in 1937, and Daniel had been working as a hired hand when he met Loretta at a county dance in 1942. They married that December, borrowing enough money to lease the property back from the bank with the understanding that 3 years of successful harvests might allow them to buy it back outright. Daniel's enlistment in March of 1943 destroyed that plan. Loretta found herself alone on a failing farm with mounting debts and no clear path forward. Letters discovered in the farmhouse walls decades later revealed a woman unraveling through the summer and fall of 1944. She wrote to her sister in Topeka describing vivid dreams where Daniel walked through the kitchen door covered in sand, trying to speak but producing only the sound of waves. Another letter, never mailed, contained detailed calculations of how long she could survive on stored grain if she stopped buying anything beyond kerosene and salt. A third letter addressed to no one simply repeated the phrase, "They took him and gave me paper," 47 times across 3 pages. Her first visit to the PO camp came after Sergeant Farley mentioned at the general store that German prisoners were available for farm labor at no cost beyond supervision. Several local farmers had used them to bring in late harvests or repair equipment. Loretta appeared at the camp gate the next morning with a requisition form she had filled out in careful block letters. Farley's notes describe her as polite and business-like, though he mentioned she asked specifically whether the prisoners spoke English and whether any had combat experience in France. The 3 men assigned to her were chosen randomly from those available that day. Becker, Reinhardt, and Hoffmann climbed into her truck without comment, accustomed to the routine of temporary farm assignments. What struck Farley enough to note it in his daily log was Loretta's behavior during the loading process. She stood beside the truck bed and asked each man his name, his hometown, and whether he had family. When Becker mentioned a wife and 2 daughters in Hamburg, Loretta nodded slowly and said, "They must miss you terribly." The comment seemed ordinary enough until Farley noticed she was smiling. Over the next 5 weeks, Loretta requested the same 3 men for every work detail. The requests followed proper protocol. The work appeared legitimate. Farley saw nothing that violated regulations. By December 15th, when the massive blizzard began building over the western plains, Becker, Reinhardt, and Hoffman had spent more than 60 hours working Loretta's isolated farm, and not one of them had reported anything unusual about the widow who watched them with such careful attention. The blizzard that struck western Kansas on December 17, 1944 remains one of the most severe weather events in state records. The National Weather Service archives documents sustained winds exceeding 50 miles per hour, snowfall accumulation of 90 inches in 24 hours, and visibility reduced to less than 10 feet. Temperature readings plummeted to 8 degrees below zero. The storm system moved in faster than forecasters anticipated, catching several rural communities unprepared. Loretta arrived at the camp gate at 6:45 that morning, 30 minutes before the snow began. Her requisition form requested the usual 3 men for grain transport to the rail depot in Cedar Ridge. Sergeant Farley approved it without scrutiny. He had processed identical requests from her twice weekly since early November. Becker, Reinhardt, and Hoffman climbed into the truck bed, as they had done dozens of times before. The only deviation from routine came when Loretta handed each man a wool blanket, explaining that the radio predicted cold weather. Farley watched the truck disappear down the access road, then returned to the camp office where a pot of coffee was waiting. The storm hit at 7:15. Within an hour, the camp was completely isolated. Phone lines went down. The road became impassable. Farley's emergency log recovered from camp records shows his primary concern was maintaining heat in the barracks and accounting for all prisoners. The morning roll call at 9 confirmed that 29 men were present. 3 were on authorized work detail. Standard procedure. Nothing alarming. What Farley could not see was Loretta's truck moving slowly northwest away from Cedar Ridge toward her farm. The vehicle left the county road 2 miles past the Hebron crossroads and followed the dirt track leading to her property. By the time the snow began falling in earnest, the truck was already hidden inside her barn, and the 3 Germans were standing in her kitchen, confused but grateful for the warmth. Werner Hoffman's diary, discovered in 1978 during demolition of the property, provides the only first-hand account of those first hours. He described Loretta making coffee and frying eggs while the wind outside rose to a scream. She told them the storm would make roads impassable for days, that attempting to return to camp would be suicide, and that they should consider themselves fortunate to have shelter. Becker asked about protocol for extended work details. Loretta smiled and said the sergeant would understand once the weather cleared. She had already telephoned the camp before leaving that morning to report a potential delay. She had not made that call. Farley's phone log shows no incoming communication from Loretta Vance on December 17th. The 3 men accepted her explanation because the alternative seemed absurd. Why would a farmer's widow risk harboring enemy prisoners? The camp would immediately report them missing. A manhunt would begin. The logical assumption was that Loretta had indeed followed proper procedure and they were simply waiting out the storm before resuming their transport detail. They drank her coffee. They thanked her for the blankets. Reinhardt helped her bring in firewood from the covered pile behind the house. By nightfall, the storm had transformed the landscape into an impenetrable white void. Roads disappeared. Landmarks vanished. The temperature dropped to 12 below zero. Inside the farmhouse, Loretta served dinner at a table set with 4 plates, 4 forks, 4 napkins folded into careful triangles. She asked them about their families again, their homes, their lives before the war. She listened with an intensity that Hoffman described as hungry, like she was trying to memorize every word. When Becker mentioned his daughters again, Loretta reached across the table and touched his hand. "You'll see them again," she said. "I'll make sure of it." Hoffman wrote that something in her voice made him deeply uneasy, though he could not explain why. The storm continued for 3 days. Back at the camp, Sergeant Farley documented the absent prisoners in his incident log but took no immediate action. Weather conditions made investigation impossible. Military protocol for missing work details required notification to regional command within 72 hours, but only if the absence appeared suspicious. Men caught in a blizzard while on authorized transport duty did not qualify as suspicious. Farley assumed Loretta had taken shelter in Cedar Ridge and would return the prisoners once roads cleared. Inside the farmhouse, the dynamic seemed almost domestic. Loretta cooked meals. The men helped with basic chores, clearing snow from the door, maintaining the fire. The radio played constantly, bringing news of the war in Europe and weather reports predicting another front moving through the region. Hoffman's diary entries from December 18th and 19th describe an oddly comfortable captivity, though he notes that Loretta never left them alone in any room for more than a few minutes. On the 3rd night, Otto Reinhardt asked when they might attempt the return journey to camp. The storm had weakened. Visibility had improved. Loretta was washing dishes at the kitchen sink, her back to them. She remained still for nearly 30 seconds before answering. "The truck needs repairs," she said. "I noticed the engine running rough on the drive here. Best to wait until conditions are safer." Becker offered to examine it. He had mechanical training. Loretta turned from the sink and smiled. "Tomorrow," she said. "Too cold tonight." She dried her hands on her apron and suggested they listen to the evening broadcast. President Roosevelt was scheduled to speak about the progress in Belgium. They gathered around the radio in the front room. Loretta sat in a rocking chair near the window, her hands folded in her lap, watching the 3 men rather than the radio itself. The broadcast included a brief mention of German POW camps in the American Midwest, noting that security remained tight and escape attempts were rare. Loretta reached forward and turned up the volume. The following morning, December 20th, Becker walked to the barn to inspect the truck. He returned 15 minutes later, his expression troubled. He found Reinhard and Hoffman in the kitchen and spoke quietly in German. Loretta was in the cellar retrieving preserved vegetables. Hoffman's diary records the conversation. Becker had discovered the truck's distributor cap was missing. Not broken, missing entirely. The engine could not start without it. When Loretta emerged from the cellar carrying jars of pickled beets, Becker asked about the missing part. She set the jars on the counter with deliberate care. I removed it, she said. For safekeeping. You understand, I'm sure. 3 German soldiers and a running vehicle. People might get the wrong idea about my intentions. The 3 men exchanged glances. The wrong idea about her intentions. Reinhard asked very carefully what her intentions actually were. Loretta began arranging the jars in a neat row, turning each label to face forward. I intend to keep you safe, she said. The camp will assume you escaped during the storm. They'll search the highways, the rail yards, the bus stations. They won't think to look here. You'll be safe with me until the war ends. Becker stated the obvious. They had not escaped. They had been on authorized work detail. She had taken them. Loretta nodded, still arranging jars. Yes, she said. I've been very careful about that. And you've been so kind, staying here helping me. Anyone would think you came willingly. Hoffman wrote that the temperature in the kitchen seemed to drop 10 degrees. Becker asked where she had hidden the distributor cap. Loretta smiled. Somewhere you won't find it, she said. But don't worry. We have everything we need right here. Food, warmth, each other. She turned to face them fully. I know what it's like to lose someone, she said. To have them taken away. I won't let that happen again. You're home now. The realization of their situation arrived gradually, then all at once. That afternoon, while Loretta was in the front room mending clothes, Becker conducted a thorough search of the barn. The distributor cap was not there. Neither were the tools necessary to make a replacement. He found something else instead, boards and nails staged near the storm cellar entrance, along with 3 heavy padlocks still in their packaging. Hoffman's diary describes Becker's face when he returned to the house, pale despite the cold. They held a whispered conference in the barn that evening while Loretta prepared dinner. Their options were limited and grim. The nearest neighbor lived 4 miles east across open prairie. Walking there in current conditions without proper winter gear would risk frostbite or worse. They had no weapons. Loretta kept a shotgun above the kitchen door, always within her reach. The camp would be searching by now, but Becker understood military logic. Manhunts focused on transportation routes, not isolated farmhouses. As prisoners, they had no legal standing. If Loretta claimed they had threatened her, forced her to hide them, her word would carry more weight than theirs. Reinhardt proposed confronting her directly, demanding she return them to camp. Hoffman argued against it. Something in Loretta's demeanor had shifted over the past day. The careful politeness had been replaced by a possessive familiarity that bordered on delusion. She had begun calling Becker Karl her husband's middle name. When corrected, she apologized but continued doing it. That night, Loretta served dinner at 7. She had set the table with china that Hoffman recognized from a cabinet in the front room, pieces clearly saved for special occasions. Candles burned in tarnished silver holders. She wore a dress instead of her usual work clothes. I thought we should celebrate, she said. Our first week together. Becker reminded her gently that they had been there only 4 days. Loretta paused with her fork halfway to her mouth. Has it only been 4 days? She asked. It feels like longer. Like you've always been here. She smiled. Like you belong here. After dinner, she suggested they move their sleeping arrangements to more comfortable locations. The barn was too cold, she said. Too isolated. She had made up beds in the 2 upstairs rooms. They would be warmer, safer. Becker declined, stating they were fine in the barn. Loretta's expression hardened. I insist, she said. I won't have you freezing out there. You're my responsibility now. The word responsibility hung in the air like smoke. Hoffman asked what she meant by that. Loretta stood and began clearing plates. I mean that I won't lose anyone else, she said. I won't have them taken from me again. Daniel is gone, but you're here. You're alive and I can keep you that way. Reinhardt made the mistake of mentioning that the war would end eventually, that they would be repatriated to Germany. Loretta stopped moving. She stood at the sink with her back to them, holding a plate in both hands. No, she said quietly. You don't understand, there's nothing for you there. Your cities are being destroyed. Your families, she trailed off. But here you're safe with me. She turned around. The plate was still in her hands, gripped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. I've been alone for too long, she said. I've been so alone. But now I'm not. Now I have you. All 3 of you. My new family. Becker tried to stand. Loretta's free hand moved to the shotgun above the door. She didn't point it at them. She simply rested her hand on the stock. Sit down, Carl, she said. Finish your coffee. Then we'll discuss the new sleeping arrangements and some other house rules I've been thinking about. Hoffman wrote 1 sentence about that moment. We realized then that we were no longer prisoners of war. We were something much worse. By December 22nd, Loretta had implemented what she called household routines. The 3 men were required to eat meals at specific times. They could not leave the house without her permission. She locked the storm cellar at night, claiming it was for their protection in case authorities came searching. The locks Becker had found were now installed on the outside of the cellar door. Each evening at 900, she informed them it was bedtime and escorted them downstairs with the shotgun cradled in her arms like a sleeping child. The cellar had been transformed. 3 cots lined the walls, each made with clean sheets and wool blankets. Loretta had hung curtains to separate the sleeping areas, a bizarre gesture toward privacy in what was clearly a prison. A kerosene heater provided minimal warmth. She had placed photographs on a small table, family pictures that Hoffman assumed came from her own life. But when he looked closer, he realized none of them featured Loretta. They were generic images, the kind sold empty in picture frames showing anonymous families smiling at cameras. "So you remember what you're working toward," she explained when Reinhardt asked about them. "So you remember what home feels like." During the day, she assigned them tasks. Becca was to repair the porch steps, Hoffman was to organize the woodshed. Reinhardt was instructed to help her with cooking and cleaning. The work itself was mundane, but Loretta's supervision was constant and suffocating. She praised them for completing simple tasks, her voice taking on a tone one might use with children. When Hoffman stacked firewood in a configuration she disliked, she made him redo it 3 times while explaining the correct method in exhaustive detail. The radio remained their only connection to the outside world. News broadcasts confirmed that a massive search was underway for 3 escaped German POWs. Roadblocks had been established across Kansas and into neighboring states. The FBI had joined the investigation. Loretta listened to these reports with visible satisfaction. "They're looking in all the wrong places," she said. "They'll never think to look here. We're invisible." On December 24th, Christmas Eve, she prepared an elaborate dinner. Turkey, potatoes, vegetables from her cellar stores. She insisted they dress in clothes she had laid out for them, civilian shirts and trousers that had belonged to her husband. The garments fit poorly. Becca's shirt was too small across the shoulders. Reinhardt's pants were too short. Loretta seemed not to notice or care. "You look wonderful," she said, "like a proper family." After dinner, she produced a bottle of whiskey and poured 4 glasses. She raised hers in a toast. "To us," she said, "to being together, to being safe." The 3 men did not drink. Loretta's smile faded. "I said to us." Her hand drifted toward the shotgun leaning against the wall. They drank. The whiskey loosened her tongue. She began talking about Daniel, about the telegram, about the endless silence that followed. "They sent me paper," she said. "Just paper. They took a living man and gave me paper with words on it. What am I supposed to do with paper?" Her voice rose. "I can't talk to paper. I can't touch paper and feel warmth. I can't wake up next to paper and remember what it's like to not be alone." She looked at them with eyes that held no recognition of boundaries or reason. "But I have you now," she said. "Real people, living men, and I won't let anyone take you away. Not the government, not the military, not even you yourselves." Becca attempted reason. He spoke softly, explaining that they were human beings with families, with lives beyond this farmhouse. Loretta listened with her head tilted like a bird regarding something curious and incomprehensible. When he finished, she smiled. "Your families think you're dead or running," she said. "They've already mourned you. But I haven't. I won't. You're here with me, and that's where you'll stay." She stood and picked up the shotgun. "Bedtime," she announced. "Tomorrow is Christmas. I have gifts for you." Sheriff Raymond Caulfield had known Loretta Vance since she was 8 years old. He remembered her as a quiet child who helped her mother at the church bake sales. Always polite, always smiling in that distant way some children have. When she married Daniel Vance, Caulfield attended the wedding and thought they made a decent match. When Daniel died, Caulfield had personally delivered the telegram because the Western Union boy was too young to handle that kind of responsibility. By late December, something nagged at him. The federal manhunt assumed the Germans had fled toward major cities or transportation hubs. Caulfield understood that logic. He had helped establish roadblocks and searched warehouses in Cedar Ridge. But small details accumulated in his mind like snow on a windowsill. Loretta had not attended church since early December. Her mail was piling up at the post office. When he drove past her farm on December 27th, he noticed smoke from the chimney, which made sense. What did not make sense were the multiple sets of footprints in the snow near the barn, partially drifted over but clearly visible. He mentioned it to his deputy, Frank Yoder. Yoder suggested drifters or hired help. Caulfield nodded but could not shake the wrongness of it. Loretta had no money to hire help. Drifters did not stay in one place long enough to create that many tracks. He decided to visit purely as a welfare check. The roads were passable now. He had legitimate reason for concern. Inside the farmhouse, the situation was deteriorating. Loretta's gifts on Christmas morning had been wedding rings, 3 plain gold bands she claimed to have purchased months ago. She insisted each man wear one. "So everyone knows you're taken," she said, "so everyone knows you belong here." When they refused, she locked them in the cellar for 18 hours without food. Hoffman's diary entries from this period show increasing desperation. They had attempted to remove the boards from the cellar's exterior window, but Loretta had reinforced them with iron straps. They discussed overpowering her, but the shotgun was always within her reach, and she slept in a chair positioned at the top of the cellar stairs. The one time Becca tried to rush her when she opened the door, she fired into the ceiling. The sound in the confined space was deafening. "The next one goes lower," she said calmly. She had begun talking to them as if they were her husbands in truth. She discussed plans for spring planting. She mentioned repainting the bedroom. She asked Reinhardt his opinion on curtain fabric. When he did not answer, she grabbed his face with both hands and forced him to look at her. "I asked you a question," she said. Husbands answer when their wife speaks to them. The psychological pressure was methodical and relentless. She controlled every aspect of their existence. when they ate, when they slept, when they spoke. She had discovered that isolation and dependency could break men more effectively than violence. Hoffman wrote that they were beginning to comply with small requests just to avoid confrontation, and that compliance terrified him more than the shotgun. On December 28th, Sheriff Cofield's vehicle appeared in the distance, visible through the kitchen window. Loretta watched it approach for nearly a minute before speaking. "We have a visitor," she said. She turned to face the three men who were sitting at the table under her supervision. "You will go to the cellar quietly. You will make no noise. If I hear a single sound, I will tell the sheriff you attacked me and forced me to help you. They will execute you. Do you understand?" They understood. As Cofield's car pulled into the yard, Loretta was herding them toward the cellar stairs with the shotgun barrel pressed against Becca's spine. She locked them inside, smoothed her hair, and walked to the front door wearing the same distant smile Cofield remembered from her childhood. Cofield stood on the porch and knocked twice. Loretta opened the door wearing an apron, flour dusting her hands. "Sheriff," she said. "What a surprise." Her voice carried the pleasant neutrality of someone greeting an unexpected but not unwelcome guest. He explained he was checking on residents in isolated areas, making sure everyone had weathered the storm safely. Loretta nodded and invited him inside. The kitchen was warm. Coffee sat brewing on the stove. Everything appeared normal except for one detail that Cofield noticed immediately. 4 cups sat on the drying rack beside the sink. He had seen them before on January 15th, but that had been 3 weeks in the future from this moment. The detail lodged in his mind. Loretta offered coffee. Cofield accepted. As she poured, he mentioned the escaped prisoners, asked if she had seen anything unusual. Loretta's hand remained steady. "Nothing," she said. "I've been keeping to myself mostly." The storm was frightening enough without worrying about dangerous men on the loose. Cofield sipped his coffee. Something felt wrong in a way he could not articulate. The house was too quiet. He asked about her truck, whether she needed help with any repairs. Loretta said the truck was fine, just cold weather causing the engine to run rough. He asked if she had hired help recently. She said no, she was managing alone. The footprints outside, he suggested, seemed to indicate multiple people. Loretta laughed softly. "Those are mine, Sheriff. I've been back and forth to the barn constantly. Snow drifts make them look like more than they are." In the cellar below, the 3 men sat in absolute silence. Hoffman's diary describes hearing Cofield's voice through the floorboards so close they could make out individual words. Becca moved toward the stairs, clearly considering whether to shout for help. Reinhard grabbed his arm. The risk was too great. If Loretta convinced the sheriff they had forced her cooperation, their execution was certain. Cofield finished his coffee and stood to leave. He thanked Loretta for her time. At the door, he paused and mentioned that her electricity usage, according to the rural cooperative, had been unusually high for a single occupant. Loretta met his eyes without flinching. "I've been running the radio constantly," she said. "The news about the war and extra heating because of the cold." "Is that a problem?" "It was not a problem," Cofield said. "Just an observation." He walked to his car, started the engine, and drove 50 yards before stopping. He sat there for 5 minutes, looking back at the farmhouse through his rearview mirror. The wrongness persisted. 4 coffee cups, high electricity usage, multiple sets of footprints. None of it was damning individually, but collectively it formed a pattern he could not ignore. Inside the house, Loretta stood at the window watching until his car disappeared. Only then did she unlock the cellar door. The 3 men emerged, shaken. They had been minutes from rescue and had remained silent. Loretta smiled. "You made the right choice," she said. "You're learning. That's good. That means we can stay together without complications." That evening, she told them the sheriff suspected nothing, but his visit had created a problem. People were checking on isolated farms. More visits might come. She needed to ensure complete silence during any future interruptions. The solution, she explained, was simple. She produced lengths of rope and rolls of cloth. "Just during the day," she said. "Just as a precaution. You understand?" They did not understand, but they also did not have a choice. She bound their hands and gagged them before locking them in the cellar the next morning. She returned 8 hours later and released them for dinner, explaining that this would be the new routine whenever she expected visitors or needed to travel to town for supplies. "It's for your own protection," she said. "If you can't make noise, you can't accidentally give us away." Hoffman wrote that night that they were no longer men. They were possessions managed and controlled like livestock. The realization had moved beyond horror into something approaching acceptance, and that acceptance frightened him most of all. Sheriff Cofield could not let it go. On January 2nd, 1945, he returned to the farmhouse unannounced. This time he brought Deputy Yoder. They arrived at dawn, early enough that smoke should have been rising from a single chimney if Loretta was alone. Instead, smoke came from 3 different points: the kitchen stove, the front room fireplace, and the upstairs bedroom. Cofield noted this in the report he filed later that day. Loretta answered the door in the same calm manner as before. Her explanation was immediate. She had been burning old furniture for extra warmth, moving between rooms to 10 different fires. Cofield asked to see inside. Loretta hesitated for only a second before stepping aside. "Of course, Sheriff, though I'm not sure what you're looking for." The 2 men walked through the house. Everything appeared ordinary. Clean dishes, made beds, no signs of occupancy beyond what a single woman would create. Cofield opened the cellar door and peered down the stairs. The space below was dark and appeared empty. What he could not see were the three men pressed against the far wall, bound and gagged, hidden behind the hanging curtains Loretta had installed weeks earlier. In the kitchen, Yoda noticed something that Caulfield had missed. Men's boots by the back door, too large for Loretta. She explained they had been Daniel's, that she wore them for outdoor work because they provided better traction in snow. Yoda accepted this. Caulfield did not. He walked to the barn and examined the truck. The hood was cold. The vehicle had not been driven recently. He looked under the dashboard and noticed immediately that the distributor cap was missing. When he returned to the house, Loretta was making coffee again. Caulfield asked directly why her truck's distributor cap had been removed. Loretta's expression did not change. "I took it out for the winter," she said. "Daniel taught me to do that. Prevents freezing damage to the engine." It was not true. Distributor caps did not need winter removal. Caulfield knew this. More importantly, Loretta knew this, which meant she was lying and did not care if he recognized the lie. He asked her to come to town to answer a few questions in a more formal setting. Loretta set down the coffee pot. "Am I under arrest, Sheriff?" Caulfield said no, just questions. Loretta smiled. "Then I'll stay here if that's all right. I have bread rising and chores that can't wait." Caulfield and Yoda returned to Cedar Ridge. The deputy thought Caulfield was seeing problems where none existed. A widow acting strange was not evidence of harboring fugitives. Caulfield disagreed, but at nothing concrete. He contacted the FBI field office in Wichita and reported his suspicions. The agent he spoke with was polite but dismissive. 3 weeks had passed since the escape. The prisoners had likely reached Mexico or been killed by exposure. A rural widow with no criminal history and no apparent motive was not a priority. Caulfield spent the next 12 days gathering evidence. He documented Loretta's electricity usage over 3 months. He interviewed neighbors about her behavior. He tracked her movements through town, noting that she purchased far more food than a single person would need. He discovered that she had withdrawn $200 from her bank account in early December, an enormous sum for someone reportedly struggling financially. He found a receipt from a hardware store showing purchase of 3 sets of men's work clothes in sizes that did not match her late husband. On January 14th, he returned to the FBI with a file folder containing 14 pages of documentation. This time the agent listened. By dawn on January 15th, 6 federal vehicles and 20 agents surrounded Loretta Vance's farmhouse. Caulfield stood among them, knowing he was right, but hoping desperately he was wrong about what they would find inside. The standoff began at 60:17 in the morning. Federal agents surrounded the property with weapons drawn. A loudspeaker crackled to life, ordering anyone inside to exit with hands visible. Loretta appeared at the front door, still wearing her nightgown, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked at the assembled law enforcement with an expression of mild confusion, as if they had arrived to the wrong address. The lead FBI agent, whose report is preserved in the National Archives, ordered her to surrender. Loretta asked what she was surrendering for. The agent stated they had reason to believe she was harboring escaped prisoners. Loretta smiled. "I'm harboring no one, sir. I'm alone here. You're welcome to look." Inside the cellar, the 3 men heard everything. For nearly a month they had been bound, threatened, psychologically broken down through isolation and complete dependence on their captor. They had become accustomed to silence, to compliance, to the numbing routine of captivity. But the sound of that loudspeaker changed something fundamental. Hoffman would later tell military investigators that hearing other voices, knowing rescue was meters away, broke through the fog of learned helplessness that had settled over them. Becker made the decision. He was the ranking officer. He had watched his men deteriorate under Loretta's control. He had felt his own mind bending under the constant pressure of her delusions. The cellar door was bolted from outside, but the wood was old. The 3 men, working together despite their bound hands, threw themselves against it. Once. Twice. On the 3rd impact, the bolt tore from its housing. They stumbled up the stairs into the kitchen just as Loretta was assuring the FBI agent that a search would reveal nothing. The sight of 3 gaunt, unshaven men in ill-fitting civilian clothes emerging from her cellar created immediate chaos. Agents rushed forward. Loretta's composure finally shattered. She began screaming that the men had forced her, threatened her, made her hide them. But her story collapsed under the weight of physical evidence. The cellar told the truth more clearly than any testimony. The cots with their embroidered pillows, the family photographs, the locks installed on the outside of the door, the ropes and gags stored in a neat pile, the wedding rings in a small box on the shelf. Agents found Loretta's diary hidden in her bedroom. Entries detailing her plan dating back to October, including the specific observation that men without countries have nowhere to run and no one to believe them. Becker, Reinhardt, and Hoffman were taken into federal custody. Medical examination showed signs of malnutrition, rope burns on their wrists and ankles, and what the examining physician described as severe psychological trauma. Their statements, taken separately, corroborated every detail. Loretta had orchestrated the entire situation. She had removed the distributor cap before they even entered the truck. She had planned the timing with the blizzard. She had transformed her cellar into a prison weeks before the escape. Loretta was arrested and charged with treason, kidnapping, and conspiracy. Her psychiatric evaluation conducted at the county facility revealed a complete psychotic break following her husband's death. She genuinely believed she was protecting the men, saving them from a war that had already taken too much. She spoke of them as her family, insisted they would thank her eventually for keeping them safe. When informed they had been returned to POW custody and would be repatriated to Germany, she became catatonic for 3 days. The case was immediately classified. The propaganda value to enemy forces was considered too dangerous. The official story released to local press stated simply that a woman had harbored escaped prisoners and been apprehended. No details about the cellar, the psychological captivity, or the month-long ordeal were disclosed. The 3 German officers signed agreements never to discuss the events publicly. They returned to Germany in 1946 and disappeared into private life. Loretta Vance spent the remaining 18 years of her life in psychiatric confinement. Her case file, sealed until 1998, shows that she never accepted reality. She continued to speak of her men as if they were merely away on a trip. She set aside portions of her meals for them. She talked to empty chairs at the common room table. The human mind, when broken badly enough, sometimes refuses to acknowledge the breaking. The farmhouse stood empty for 7 years before being demolished. Local teenagers claimed it was haunted, that you could hear screaming from the cellar on quiet nights. More likely, they heard wind through broken boards, but the story persisted. Sometimes the truth is too disturbing to speak plainly, so communities create ghost stories instead. In the end, 3 men survived captivity twice. Once as prisoners of war, once as prisoners of delusion. They carried both imprisonments for the rest of their lives. But only one left scars that never healed. If stories like this fascinate you, if you want to explore more dark corners of forgotten history, hit that like button and subscribe. There are hundreds of cases buried in archives waiting to be told. The question is, are you ready to hear them?